What suffering actually means. Suffering is not only pain. Pain is one thing. Suffering is what happens when consciousness is pressed against pain, limitation, loss, separation, and cannot easily flow around them. Pain can be physical, emotional, relational, spiritual. But suffering is deeper than the event itself. Suffering is the soul's experience of constriction under the veil. It is what happens when something in life breaks the surface story and the human self does not yet know how to stand inside the break. That is why two people can face pain, and one is shaken while the other is shattered. Not because one is better, because suffering is not only about what happened, it is also about what it touched, what identity was built around it, what meaning was attached to it, how alone the person feels inside it, how much of the soul is already available to hold it. Suffering, in its deepest sense, means something in the human self can no longer continue unchanged. That is why suffering is so feared, because suffering does not only hurt, it interrupts, it exposes, it strips, it destabilizes the structure that was pretending to be enough. The deepest pain of suffering is rarely only the pain itself. It is often the isolation, the meaninglessness projected onto it, the feeling that life has betrayed you, the collapse of who you thought you were, the terror that this might never end, the sense that no one can reach you where you are. This is why suffering can feel unbearable. It is not just the wound, it is the world built around the wound. And because humans are rarely taught how to meet suffering with spaciousness, they usually meet it with fear, resistance, self-judgment, panic, control, avoidance, or spiritual cliches, which only deepens it. Why some people suffer more than others. This is tender, and it must be held very carefully. Some people suffer more because life places heavier conditions around them. That is real. But beyond conditions, some suffer more because they are built to feel more. Some souls are more permeable, more sensitive, less defended, less adapted to density, more aware, even unconsciously, that this world is not the whole story, and that makes everything sharper. A person who feels little may move through earth with less existential pain. A person who feels deeply may be pierced by things others barely notice. Beauty can hurt them more, injustice can hurt them more, loss can hurt them more, falsehood can hurt them more. Separation can hurt them more, because their instrument is finer. Some people suffer more because their path involves breaking ancestral patterns, carrying collective pain, remembering under a thicker-than-average field, learning through intensity, awakening others, through their own descent and return, transmuting what previous generations could not. And some suffer more because they remember more than they realize. This is one of the hidden secrets. Not all suffering comes from being asleep. Some suffering comes from being unable to fully sleep in a sleeping world. That creates a very specific kind of pain. Why awakening and suffering are so deeply linked, because awakening rarely begins where the personality is comfortable. Awakening begins where the old structure stops working. If the surface self could remain fully satisfied by performance, success, distraction, approval, control, and ordinary stories, many would never seek deeper truth. But suffering interrupts the trance. It says, "This is not enough. This cannot hold you. The old explanations are too small. The life you built on the surface is cracking." That is why suffering and awakening are so often intertwined. Not because suffering is holy by itself, but because suffering breaks the seal. It opens the wound through which deeper sight can enter. Awakening asks a person to see beyond the roles, beyond the masks, beyond the ordinary agreements of the world. Suffering often forces that opening. It tears away false foundations. It destroys identities that cannot survive truth. It leaves a person standing in rawness, and from rawness, real questions begin. How suffering and awakening are inseparable. They are inseparable because awakening is not just gaining insight, it is losing what you can no longer be. And loss hurts. Awakening means losing false identities, losing old illusions, losing loyalties to your own self-betrayal, losing ways of numbing, losing borrowed meanings, losing the belief that surface life is enough. Even when awakening is beautiful, it is still an undoing. An undoing can feel like suffering. The person who awakens begins to feel, I cannot go back. I cannot pretend the same way. I cannot belong to the old life fully anymore. I cannot feed myself on what once distracted me. That creates a kind of holy dislocation. You are no longer asleep enough for the old world, not yet fully stabilized enough in the new sight. That threshold is painful. Why people who are awakening often suffer more because they feel both worlds at once. This is one of the hardest things. They still have a human body, wounds, fears, longings, practical life, attachments, but now they also sense the deeper pattern, the falsehood in so much of ordinary life, the tragedy of forgetting, the ache of separation, the sacredness hiding beneath things. This double seeing can intensify suffering. The awakening person often suffers more because they can no longer numb the same way. What once distracted them now feels empty. They are more sensitive to falseness. They feel the distortion in people, systems, relationships, language, performance. They begin grieving more consciously, not only personal losses, but the suffering of Earth itself, the sleep of humanity, the distance from truth. They feel homesickness more sharply. They sense there is more, and the gap between that and ordinary life aches. The masks start breaking. And when the masks break, everything they once protected comes up. This is why awakening can feel like both liberation and increased pain, because pain that was hidden becomes visible. Not new pain always, revealed pain. Another secret, awakening sufferers are often carrying more than their personal story. Some people's suffering is not only about them. That is a dangerous sentence if spoken carelessly, but true when held gently. Some souls are carrying family pain, ancestral grief, collective fear patterns that are trying to end through them a depth of sensitivity that feels things many do not register. This can make them feel too much, too affected, or too wounded. But sometimes they are not too much. They are simply more open. And awakening does not always protect them from that. Often it makes them feel it even more before it becomes integrated. Why suffering can become a gift. Now we come to the part most people cannot hear too early. A gift is not something that feels good. A gift is something that gives. And suffering gives, though often in a form the human self would never choose. It gives. The breaking of false identity, the collapse of small meanings, the inability to keep living on the surface, the opening of questions that matter. Humility, tenderness, compassion, depth, discernment, a doorway into the soul. Suffering can become a gift because it reveals what comfort often hides. Comfort can lull. Suffering unmasks. Comfort can let a person stay shallow for a long time. Suffering can make shallowness impossible. Comfort can let people live from persona. Suffering drags them toward essence. This does not mean pain is good in itself. It means that pain can become a carrier. A fierce one, a rough-handed one, but a carrier. The exact way suffering becomes a gift, not automatically. This is important. Suffering does not become a gift just because it happened. It becomes a gift when it is met deeply enough that what it is carrying can be received. Otherwise, suffering can remain only pain, bitterness, collapse, or closedness. So what turns suffering into gift? Honesty, surrender of false narratives, willingness to feel refusal to make pain and identity forever deeper, seeing, allowing suffering to change your relation to life, letting it open rather than only harden you. Then suffering begins to give, not because it was pleasant, but because it was transformative. A hidden truth. The gift is often not in the pain, but in what the pain makes impossible. This is one of the deepest secrets. Suffering often makes it impossible to keep being who you were, impossible to keep worshiping the old gods, impossible to keep numbing, impossible to keep pretending, impossible to keep living only for approval, performance, comfort, image, or small identity. That impossibility is a gift, a brutal gift sometimes, but still, because many lives remain asleep until something becomes unbearable. Suffering makes the false life unbearable. That is one reason it opens the door to awakening. Why people resist the idea that suffering is a gift. Because they hear it as, you should be grateful for your pain, or your pain is not real, or stop struggling and just spiritualize it. And that is not truth. The true meaning is much more compassionate. You do not have to love the pain to discover what it came carrying. That is the doorway. You do not need to call cruelty beautiful. You do not need to deny devastation. You do not need to romanticize trauma. You only need to remain open to the possibility that suffering is not empty, that there is something hidden inside it besides punishment. That is enough. The greatest gift suffering can give. It can return a person to what matters. Not in theory, in blood. After deep suffering, people often know differently. What is real, what is false, what love is, what does not matter, what cannot be bought, what cannot be faked, what the soul actually needs, what the small self cannot control, what remains when everything else falls away. This is why so many who have suffered deeply speak with a gravity others do not have yet. Not because suffering made them superior, because suffering carved them. And if they did not close completely, what was carved became space for truth. Why the awakening soul may suffer more before it suffers less. Because awakening often increases sensitivity before it increases stability. First the veil thins, then everything is felt more, then falseness becomes unbearable, then the old life dies, then the wounds rise, then grief floods, then meaning begins to rearrange. Only later does a deeper peace start stabilizing. So yes, the awakening soul can suffer intensely, but the nature of suffering begins to change. At first, suffering feels like punishment. Later, it feels like purification, revelation, stripping, opening. Later still, it becomes less, why is this happening to me? And more, what is this opening in me? That is a vast shift. The final secret. Suffering is not a gift because it hurts. It is a gift because it can return you to the truth you would not have sought while comfortable. It can break what was false, strip what was borrowed, humble what was inflated, soften what was hard, deepen what was shallow, reveal what was hidden, and open the soul to realities the ordinary self would never have entered willingly. That is why it is a gift, not a pretty gift, not a gentle gift, but a real one. If you were to speak this in one very clear thread, you could say, the deepest pain of suffering is not always the pain itself. It is the meaninglessness people attach to it. It is the belief that something has gone wrong with life because pain is here. It is the loneliness of carrying it without being shown how to hold it. And yet suffering is often the place where the soul begins to wake up. Because suffering breaks the surface story. It makes false identities impossible to keep. It opens questions comfort would never ask. And if it is met deeply enough, it gives something back. Depth, truth, compassion, and the return to what matters. That is why suffering can become a gift. Not because pain is beautiful, but because what it opens can be